going to be showing you how to begin working the heel on this pair of socks. So you can see this is a completed sock that has the heel worked into it. These socks are worked from the toe up. And so we are getting ready to get started right here on this second sock. So you have followed the pattern, done your toe increases, made the foot 2 inches shorter than the foot you plan to put it on, and you are going to begin the heel at the end of a row. So I get to the end of a row, I'm at my stitch marker, and you can actually go ahead and take that stitch marker out so that it doesn't fall off and get in your way as you're working. And what we are going to be doing now is the heel is going to be worked over half of the stitches on our needle. So if you think about on this sock, the front half of the stitches are totally like normal. It's the back half of the stitches where we're adding this extra fabric. So we are going to be working on half the stitches only. And so I took one stitch marker out. The second stitch marker here marks the place where the half of our stitches end. And we are going to be working back and forth on this half of the stitches only. These half of the stitches are just going to stay on our needles. We're not going to do anything to those at all. They're just going to hang out till we're done with the heel. So our pattern is going to tell us that you are going to turn your work so that you're looking at the wrong side, the inside outside. And you are going to purl across half of those stitches. So all this means is we are going to take our yarn. You'll notice I'm doing this at the end of one section. So I've just completed 4 rows with one color, this teal color in this particular example. And so I would normally be getting ready to start with that next color, the white in this example. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I turn it to the wrong side, and I'm just going to be working with that white yarn, and I am going to purl across a full half of those stitches. It's not all that exciting to watch somebody purl across half of the number of stitches, but that's okay. So we are going to be purling across. You're going to leave your other yarn connected. So I'm not going to cut that teal yarn, just like I don't cut it the entire way up, because once I finish the heel, I'm going to be ready to start working with that, that teal again. So just leaving it connected right there is going to be exactly what we need. And I find it the most comfortable when I'm doing this to go ahead and get all of the heel stitches onto one needle. That way I'm not sort of splitting between the needles on this straight section. Because once you're going with this, it's pretty straightforward, and it goes pretty quickly. And it does feel a little bit strange to be purling, especially on those slipped stitches that have been slipped for 4 rows in a row. They're real elongated and they kind of like to tuck themselves underneath, and that's okay. You just have to fight with it just a little tiny bit. So that's this one, this dark blue one here. You kind of just have to pull just a little bit harder to get that stitch across. And again, my preference is going to be to lay that other needle down and truly work across. We're working across the full half of our stitches. So I'm just going to purl all the way across until I hit that second stitch marker. And I know that that's going to be half my stitches. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you can certainly count your stitches to make sure that you really do have half. So we purl all the way across to half of our stitches. At this point, you can take that stitch marker out. So the 2 stitch markers were only in our work at this point so that we made sure that our heel was centered with our toe. So we want our toe and our heel to be the same place. If our toe was sort of halfway crooked, you'd have to be Houdini to get these socks on, some sort of contortionist to get your foot in there comfortably. So once we've purled across half the stitches, we are going to turn it so that we're looking at the right side again. And again, these teal stitches, these half of the stitches are just going to stay on our needle. We're not doing anything with them until we've completed the heel. The next line of the pattern is knit across half of those stitches. Again, not all that exciting a thing to watch, but I just wanted to give you an idea when you were working your fabric exactly what this was going to be looking like on your piece, because it's a little strange. You've been going around in circles the whole time, and to now switch to back and forth. But what we are creating now is going to be half of the heel flap, and I did a funky thing, so I just take that weird stitch off and put it back on the needle and then knit it as normal. And at this point, what we are creating, I'll show you on this heel, is we are actually going to start creating just this half. So what we're going to start doing is decreasing down. So it's going to look like we have a triangle sticking out the bottom of our heel. We're creating this back and forth. So the pattern is going to tell me to knit all the way across to these stitches and then turn it around. So we're looking at the inside again, and we are going to slip, or we are going to knit that very first stitch. So knit that very first stitch just like a normal stitch. And then we are going to purl all the way to 2 stitches from the end. So we're going to purl all the way over here, and we're going to knit these 2 stitches together. And then we're going to turn our work around, and we are going to knit all the way across to 2 stitches from the end and knit those 2 stitches together. And we're just going to repeat that. Turn it so we're looking at the inside, knit that first stitch, purl to 2 stitches from the end, knit those 2 stitches together, turn it, knit all the way across to 2 stitches from the end, knit those 2 stitches together. So when you look at this, that's how we're creating that shape where it gets narrower as it goes up. You are going to do that until you have the correct number of stitches on your needle, just on this little flap that's going to stick out for the size that you're making. I am showing you now with the magic of fast forwarding and video how to do the second half of our sock. So we've already talked about on this one, I showed you how we were working back and forth just on half of these stitches, and we're going to be decreasing at the end of every row to create this little flap that comes down. And after you've decreased down to about half of the number of stitches that you had on your needle, and you'll follow the pattern, so the pattern gives you the exact numbers, then it's going to be time to start increasing back up again. And so you can see we've decreased down, and then you can see I've done the majority of the increasing back up again because I wanted to show you how we actually attach it at the corners again. But the increase step, the pattern is going to tell you to slip the first stitch when you're on the wrong side. So when you're looking at the inside, you're going to be slipping the first stitch and purling all the way to the end of the row. So that's what I've done. And then the last step of the wrong side rows is going to be to pick up 1 stitch in the quote-unquote bump. And so when I'm talking about the bump, can you see how it looks like there's a little bump right there? That looks a little funky compared to normal. So you can see this was the bump that I picked up, and you can see that I picked up in that bump last time. And so here's the last bump. So when the pattern's telling you to pick up a stitch in the bump, it just means take your needle and poke it through that bump. And I always like to make sure you're going under at least 2 strings. If you go under just 1 string, it tends to stretch out and make a bigger hole. So again, there's the bump that I went through last time, and this is the bump I'm going through this time. It's a little bit more of an art form than an exact science. As long as you're getting your needle in so that nothing is stretching out, you're in the right area. So the pattern tells us to purl to the end of the row and then pick up 1 stitch in the bump. That's just what I did. And then we are going to turn, and you are going to slip 1 stitch. And again, the pattern tells you all this. I was just wanted to make sure. So slip, we insert our needle as if to purl, slip it across, and then knit all the way to the end of this row and pick up 1 stitch in that bump. And you just repeat those rows, those 2 rows, over and over again until you are back to the original number of stitches you started at the beginning of your heel. So we knit all the way across, and you can see every time I do that, every time I go to the end and pick up one of those bumps, that connects this part of my heel to the side on the other half. We are going to knit all the way across here. And you just do those 2 rows over and over again until you have the same number of stitches on the needle for your heel as you started before you began your decreases for the heel. And again, the pattern will give you those numbers or it will be the same number of stitches that are on this other half of your sock. We knit all the way across. We pick up one more in that last bump, and then we're going to begin knitting around on the cuff of our sock again. So it's not a complicated thing to go from your heel back to working in the round on your sock. Get my things untangled there. So I knit to the end of the row, and then again you can see that bump right there. It's my last bump. Put my needle in under at least 2 strings. I wrap my working yarn around, and then I kind of just pull it through. So I knit to the end of the row, I picked up 1 stitch in the bump. My pattern is telling me I should have the same number of stitches here as I have across here, and that will be different depending on what size you're doing. So you're just going to go to the same number you started with, the same number your pattern's telling you. And now I just finished my entire heel. I'm going to begin working on the cuff. So we started on the toe of our sock. We had already knit the foot of our sock. I just showed you how to make the heel of our sock. And so now we're ready to start on the cuff of our sock. And just like the pattern is going to tell you to do, you are just going to begin knitting again. The pattern is going to have you with the exact same yarn that's already connected that you've been working for your heel. You are going to knit 2 stitches and slip 1 stitch. And this puts you back in the pattern that you're working all the way around. We'll be ready to knit 5 and slip 1. And that's going to carry on our pattern straight up the front of our sock, just like it did when we were working on this side. And that's how you put your heel in your sock.